Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the 17th G20 Summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to lay out India's perspective on addressing key global challenges in areas of health, post-pandemic economic recovery, energy and food security at 17th G20 Summit in Bali. PM Modi will also have separate bilateral meetings with a number of leaders on the sidelines of this particular summit. Now, this G20 Summit of the world's biggest economies assumes significance for New Delhi, as it will also see the handing over of the G20 presidency to India by Indonesia at the closing ceremony of this annual gathering. The G20 is the premier forum for international economic cooperation, representing around 85% of the global GDP, over 75% of the global trade, and almost two-thirds of the world's population. So what will be the key focus areas at this G20 summit, and what are the expectations from here? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we have in the studio Mr. Ravi Prasad Narayanan is joining us. He's Associate Professor with the Center for East Asian Studies in JNU. Welcome, Professor Narayanan, to the studio. We are also joined by former Ambassador Jitendra Mishra, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary is also with us, Foreign Affairs Editor with Hindustan Times. I'll begin with you, Ambassador Mishra, and let's first start by, laying down the groundwork here in terms of understanding a bit more about G20 and its significance as well. Because there are several, multilateral forums. Of late, we've just had the summit meetings for some of them as well. But G20 holds a very important place. I gave some figures in terms of trade, population, economies attached with it as well. But given all that in consideration, why is it so important and significant?
Thank you very much for inviting me for the show. You said it, 85% of the world's output, 75% of trade, and about two-thirds of population. So in terms of figures and heft, economic heft, the G20 punches above its weight. Therefore, it becomes more consequential compared to other international organizations. Having said that, I am not personally a great fan of multilateralism. I still feel that the most important issues, at least at the strategic level, in the world are still decided at the bilateral level. Therefore, the G20 becomes very consequential, even more so at the bilateral level, as we'll probably discuss US and China. And the international media is focused so much on that to the detriment of the G20 issues as such. And of course, the Ukraine war and the post-pandemic recovery. I'm not saying that the G20 has not played an important role. It has. In fact, it is more broad-based than the G7 and therefore far more consequential and relevant at this point of time in world history.
Okay.
But at the same time, we also have to remember that the G20 has delivered more in the past than in the recent past and less so in the present. For example, 2008, 2009, it helped in the world's recovery, a $5 trillion boost to demand, $1.1 trillion boost to the IMF, tightening of financial regulations, and they were successful. And some summits have been used to resolve trade disputes, such as 2019 between the United States and China. We don't know what will happen now. The media in the world, in the West generally, is somewhat cynical that the G20 has really foundered, lost its way, like many other multilateral organizations. As you said, there are so many in the world today that who do we choose from? I mean, there is a lot on the menu. So it's going to be a bit of a struggle. But if there is some significant outcome at the bilateral level, even the meeting, I would say, between Presidents Biden and Xi is itself an outcome, even if nothing comes out of it. We'll talk about that later. But as I said, it's all bilateral, and multilateral is important, but only to a point.
Indeed, these multilateral forums do provide an opportunity to various leaders to go ahead and have those, one-on-one discussions and dialogue on various issues. Professor Narayanan, from your perspective, if we have to understand, as Mr. Mishra was referring to, that vis-a-vis the other multilateral forums G20 has delivered. Of course, in the recent past, there have been some hiccups as well. But given the present situation, the present geopolitical situation as well, and the economic situation, since this is considered to be primarily an economic cooperation forum, how do you see the significance and the importance of a multilateral fora like this?
I will agree with Ambassador, because as a multilateral forum, what is comprising it are 20 bilaterals who have come together. Second, it poses a lot of challenges to the United Nations. Why? Because the UN has for long been controlled, and whatever is decided requires perhaps the approval of the State Department in the United States. G20 goes beyond, where maybe it is an expression of a whole new world order in the making. The United States, I think it is time, decided to get over 1945. All structures which they have constructed still exist because they give it legitimacy. But the same United States is very hesitant to sign. Actually, they have signed, but they have not ratified the UNCLOS, UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, and they pontificate to the rest of the world to adhere by UNCLOS norms. So it is these aspects which are allowing countries like China to throw their weight.
Okay.
Now, China that way is not exactly an adherent to international norms. The claims they make lack any historical basis in any case. Historical claims are not accepted by the UNCLOS. Beyond this, the G20 has to rationalize, are we in a world which is looking beyond Westphalian constructs of states? Is it going to be the cultural aspects of states? Because then states have to be reconfigured and they'll be naming themselves as realms. So if it is the Indian realm, only the map can tell us where the Indian realm begins and where does it taper away. So these are aspects of G20 has to discuss, maybe not now, but at least float as an issue. Because the world cannot be decided by what Washington wants. Period.
Pramit, looking at that aspect, and then of course we would like to understand from you as well how you've seen the way G20 as a multilateral forum has progressed over the years. This is the 17th summit which is happening right now. In terms of outcomes so far, in terms of challenges or issues wherein solutions have been found, or at least a very constructive effort has been made by the member countries to try and find a solution.
So the G20 was actually an American creation. It was created by President George W. Bush because he recognized that the G7 summit, which was the summit of the leading Western economies, no longer was powerful or actually relevant enough to handle major international crises. And as the ambassador has correctly said, in many ways its high point was its response at the Pittsburgh summit to the global financial crisis of 2000-2008, where it was decided to have a coordinated global stimulus, which is where which is exactly the type of thing that the G20 is very good at. Rather than have the central banks or the governments of the world fight with each other on a financial or fiscal policy, their policies, the idea is to coordinate such actions. Today, we are also now heading into a global recession. And so the G20 therefore becomes much more important than it has been over the past several years, where the world economy was doing reasonably well. And so therefore coordination wasn't all that important. But we have also the additional crisis of climate. And climate and energy, and a related issue now of food, in the sense that fertilizer supply chains, climate changes are starting to disrupt global harvests and food supply chains, means that the G20 has now become much more much more relevant than it has been for at least the past decade. And I think that's where you're going to see some action. Unfortunately, this G20 may not accomplish too much, but these are all part of the agenda for India when we take over the chair and host the G20 next year.
Okay, okay. Ambassador Mishra, as Pramit is pointing out, the issues like climate change, food security, energy security, and post-pandemic economic recovery as well. These seemingly are the key focus areas at this G20 summit. And, with India assuming the presidency next year, it's also very important to look at what India brings to the table when we are talking about all these major issues.
Oh, absolutely. What India brings to the table will be consequential for the rest of the world, for better or for worse. And we have heard so many statements for the shift from a balancing power to a leading power. And of course, exhortations to India to act in a certain way and show leadership, such as climate change. So it is very possible that there is something under wraps which will be announced by the Prime Minister. Since we are going to become the chair of the next G20, India would like, as a practitioner, I'll just say that we would like to showcase something that's positive, something that's energizing and enabling to an organization that has founded in recent years. It's possible, and it's not been stated. All we have heard from the Ministry of External Affairs statements is that the Prime Minister will be on certain on certain groups, and he will be speaking, addressing them. And we mentioned climate change and other things. That will be there, of course. But as I said, India will probably try to leverage the fact that it's the chair, the next coming chair, to get some benefit at the global level to India's advantage, as any other country does, apart from the optics and the photo ops and other things, and significantly also bilateral meetings. For example, if let's talk hypothetically, will there be a meeting between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi? We don't know. Nothing has been announced. Now, it's a little bit odd in one way, because all the three Quad members are meeting each other at the level of presidents and prime ministers on this occasion. Now, we don't know what will happen with China, that is. The US, China, Australia, China, and Japan, China. And they have been held already. US, China, and Japan, China, certainly. So if and when President Xi comes for the next G20 summit, are we going to not have a one-on-one meeting in our own country? So these are very significant questions, and I'm very intrigued. And I always go back to the bilateral level. Is it going to happen this time, or is it not going to happen? And I'm quite surprised that in the media, there's no discussion of that, or even speculation, because these occasions become significant platforms to, if not to resolve, at least to douse the flames and to contain inflamed issues in bilateral ties, as seems to be happening after the meeting, or the ongoing meeting right now, between Presidents Biden and Xi. And they made the perfect statements, opening statements, that nobody wants war, nobody wants conflict over Taiwan or other things. Of course, there are issues on trade, and there may not be a joint statement, but significantly, these bilateral outcomes, whatever they are, in whatever shape they evolve and come out, will be the real outcomes of the summit. But as Pramit said, it's also very important to note that we are coming at a crisis situation post-COVID. So what happened in 2008, 2009, was from the banking system, the collapse of the global financial system. And here it's the collapse of global health, which has had a devastating effect. Indeed. So is crisis an opportunity? That's a very big question.
Okay, indeed. And taking it to Professor Narendran here, in terms of issues, Professor Narendran, as both the other gentlemen are also referring to, and I was pointing out earlier, economic recovery, topmost on the agenda, of course, for everybody, for all the countries. But so equally important and intertwined is the food security, the energy security as well. The issues with climate change, COP27, of course, there was a lot of discussions which took place. But then, at every meeting, where the world leaders are together. Perhaps these are the challenges which should have their attention. And in this summit, from your perspective, are these the key issues, or are we going to look at something else as well?
I think they also need to look at health. For instance, the World Health Organization, they have not played a very effective role when it comes to dealing with the pandemic. They have not been able to persuade the whole world to have a common, you could say, medical protocol and prescriptions so that people don't have problems in traveling from country A to country Z. This has to be dealt with immediately. Second, when it comes to economic aspects, it is a very strange phase where most countries are actually ending up subsidizing the United States, although internally they are going through an economic problem. But the rest of the world is quietly being forced to shell out their reserves. When currency values fall, the US dollar is going up, but the cost is ultimately paid by countries in the global south. Speaking of the G20, what really concerns me is that the G20 has only one country from Africa, South Africa. Why not any other country or from any other region of Africa? India plays a very important role as it is the medium of, you could say, moderation when it comes to the conflict happening between Ukraine and Russia. Both the presidents have been invited. India can perhaps, in the sidelines, encourage both these countries to step back and resolve issues without the conflict escalating. Sadly, who benefits from this conflict? Definitely not the two countries. We all know defense industries, they are the ones who succeed most in this time. And since we all watch economies very closely, how come the share market in countries like the United States have actually not gone down? I don't wish it goes down, but it is as if there is some kind of profit making and profit taking that is happening.
Okay.
So these are concerns. I don't know whether G20 will be discussing all these issues, but G20 is the perfect forum where India brings a leverage of, you could say, stability to what is happening in the world.
Okay. Pramit, I'll take you to these 2 points, which both Professor Narayanan and Ambassador Mishra was referring to, in terms of keeping an eye out for bilaterals there, because therein you will get the key elements of perhaps the real action which might be happening, or in terms of real pathways for solutions to the challenges which world as a whole is facing. But ultimately, perhaps two nations at one point in time may figure out ways to find a solution. So should we keep a very close watch for bilaterals? Perhaps there might be some key elements to watch out for there.
Well, as the ambassador mentioned, many ways the most substantive issues at G20 or multilateral summits are often done at the bilateral level. This summit, I don't expect too much to happen, partly because either at the foreign minister level or at the prime ministerial head of state level, we've already interacted with a fair number of these countries very recently, including the United States, Russia, and China to some degree, insofar as Modi and Xi Jinping shared the same room at the SCO summit in Samarkand. But there's always an opportunity to have another meeting. And I think I would expect Modi to hold meetings at least with the US President, Joe Biden, given our flourishing relationship with the United States. Almost presumably also the Indonesian president, because he is the host. And probably Japan, maybe Britain, given that is a new prime minister, and a few others. China, there probably will not be a formal bilateral. In fact, there has not been one announced so far, but it's possible they will have a what is called a pull aside, in which they will sort of engage in formally, if only because we have to invite Xi Jinping twice next year to Delhi for two summits that we are hosting, the SCO and the G20. So we have to slowly, should we say, warm up a little bit to the Chinese, if nothing else. But there will be a couple of new presidents. I mean, besides the British Prime Minister, there'll be a new Brazilian president and a few others who Modi has not had a chance to interact with, and I think that would make sense for him to do so.
Okay, okay. And Mr. Mishra, before we bring this discussion to an end, from your point of view, and given all aspects, contours which we have discussed so far, what can we expect in terms of the tangible outcomes when we're talking about 17th G20 Summit? Because from here onwards, next 1 year will be, our own home ground. India is going to hold the presidency for next 1 year, and we will have ample opportunities to shape the way discussions move forward.
Well, one tangible outcome possible at the multilateral level could be the renewal of the exception that Russia had given for the creation of the humanitarian food corridor to send food to Ukraine despite the war. I think the date is sometime next week that it expires. And Turkey, intriguingly, played a very significant role in brokering that deal, that exception. And it's possible that that could be renewed. That's at the multilateral level. But at the bilateral level, as I said already, the outcome is already there to see. The fact that Presidents Xi Jinping and Biden have met, shaken hands, and are ongoing. They are in the middle of a meeting, and they've made all the right noises and very clear signals that nobody wants a conflict. And President Biden spoke about a better understanding, a mutual understanding of red lines, one another's red lines. How far are you going to go on Taiwan? How far are we going to go? Can we find a way in between? And so therefore, that itself, the fact that the meeting has taken place and both sides have cut down the sharp rhetoric of the last few years, that itself is an outcome. Despite President Biden saying that intervention in Taiwan is also on the table. I mean, to come to Taiwan's aid by the U.S. military is on the table. So that could happen. As far as our bilateral relations with China is concerned, I'm very intrigued. I heard from Pramit that a very interesting point. President Xi Jinping will be in India twice, and I did mention that myself. Now, we have taken a stand very publicly, very dourly, if I may say so, at the level of our minister, that nothing is normal till the border is normal. So if that is the case, if we are going to shake hands and have a meeting, that would be a major concession to China. And the fact that India will hold these two summits next year means that we will have to give those concessions to China because he's going to be in India. So China has the upper hand diplomatically right now.
Okay, indeed. So there it is, all to watch out for. Thank you so much, Mr. Mishra, Pramit, as well as Professor Narayanan, for sharing your views and insight with us and our viewers as our experts are pondering over what might be the key tangible outcomes and, in fact, what are the key focus areas when we're talking about the 17th G20 Summit, which is being held in Indonesia as of now. All eyes will, of course, be on the outcome after the summit. And then from there onwards, for the next 1 year, when India holds the presidency, with several meetings at various levels taking place in our country. We'll keep a close watch on all these developments and come back again with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.